and connectivity. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. I know our presenters are extremely excited to dive into this and I'll keep the introductions pretty light so we can get the conversation started, and I'll hand it off to Erin here in a bit. But my name is Taylor. I am the marketing lead at an IT staffing and recruiting firm called Motion Recruitment, and I also run a few of our local chapters in Tech in Motion, our international tech event series, which will be hosting the panel today. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, Tech in Motion is traditionally in person, but with everything that's going on, we've kind of had to pivot our model a little bit and go completely remote with our webinar series. So we're excited that everyone was able to join us virtually and kind of discuss this and make this problem being remote kind of efficient for everyone. So thank you again. So a quick few housekeeping notes before we kick off. You'll notice that if you've joined the webinar, everyone is in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions to ask the panelists, please just submit them in the chat box on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll do our best to address them at the end in the Q&A session. Today's webinar will also be available on demand after the live session ends, and you can receive a link via the email to view the video. And I think that's all of the housekeeping stuff I have. If there's any additional questions, feel free to please ask them in the chat. I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Erin Lau. Erin serves as Ericsson's VP Head of E2E EG Systems. She has over 20 years of global R&D leadership and program manager expertise in mobile communication industry. She's very passionate about accelerating 5G innovation with strategic vision and flawless execution. So I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Erin.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, depending on which time zone you're in. Very excited to be in today's webinar. And thank you, Taylor, for the kind introduction. I started my career as a 2G base station software engineer. And over the years, I have the opportunity to be on the front row witnessing the advancement of the technology from 2G to 3G to 4G and how it has impacted people's lives. And now 5G has arrived, and it's promised to bring in bigger impact in a very different way. And that's why we are here today. So I'm super excited to join this panel today with very diverse backgrounds and also a very profound industry experience to bring to you this live discussion about 5G industry impact. So without further ado, let me invite our panelists to introduce themselves and maybe say a few words about their 5G vision or what 5G means to them. And Michael.
Yeah, so my name's Mike Navy. I'm currently leading Nokia's 5G R&D, globally. That's G-Node B development effectively. And, unbeknownst to me, I guess Erin and I have been, effectively competing against each other for a number of years now, because I also kind of grown up through the ranks, started off as a base station developer in the, 2G space, stayed in the industry. It's always been evolving, always been fun, so excited to talk about 5G here. Steve?
Hey everybody, thanks for the opportunity to sit on the panel today. Hope everybody's doing well and safe. My name is Steve Latham, founder and CEO of a company called Banyan Technologists. We've built a IoT platform, an Internet of Things platform. It's a software platform that provides centralized management and control of device networks. So we rely extensively on those devices being connected in any form or fashion, and obviously are very excited about what 5G is bringing out to the marketplace in enabling further connection and improved connection capabilities. I'll pass it to Jason.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Jason Inskip, Director of AT&T's 5G Center of Excellence. My team, we kind of act as a sort of a translator between our business customers, or our end customer, I should say, and our technology folks and labs, et cetera, and products, really as they communicate back with the likes of, say, Ericsson and Nokia on what should this next network be like. I think the most interesting thing I'm seeing with 5G, it's a lot different than prior generations. It's not really, if you're looking at it as just speed, map, and who's got the best coverage and best price, you're missing out on a lot of capabilities that come with 5G. This is probably, as far as I've seen, I grew up in cellular, so this is the first network I've seen that really has user definition opportunity, where customers, enterprises can take advantage of some of the capabilities and not be, kind of locked into what the operator says. So that's really interesting to see in the future, and glad to be here. So I'll turn it to Valerie.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Valerie Clark. I'm sorry that I'm not on the webcam today. We were unable to get that to work, but very happy to be here with the esteemed panelists. I work for IBM, actually, and I'm in the Intelligent Connected Operations Global Practice, leading our 5G and Edge strategy and launch globally. What that means is that my interest in 5G is really as an exponential technology that enables us to work with clients to transform industries so that the early adopters, get competitive differentiation. So this is, I really focus on consulting and bringing those exponential technologies together. I'm very excited to be with you here today and to talk about some of the industry impacts that 5G is affording us.
Excellent. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, everyone. So as you can see, we are from the infrastructure all the way to the business application. So I think that there is a lot that we could cover today. But given we also have a very diverse background in our audience, so I think what would help is if we could, before we dive into the impact of 5G, the benefits, the challenges of it, let's just set the stage and talk a little bit about what is 5G. So, 5G, since it's so broad, it could mean different things to different people. So, what is 5G in the technical definition? And then we could dive into, how it's different from the previous generation of wireless network technology. And what I could start with is, if you look at a very high-level view, up until 4G, it's primarily a consumer's network. So, just like what Jason mentioned, it's mainly about people using cell phones, evolving from voice to data to web browsing to video streaming in 4G. And all we really focus on have been about faster, bigger bandwidth, faster speed. But how 5G is different from the previous generation would be it opens up the whole world by not being limited to the consumer's network. And so what does that mean? That means that business, enterprise, industries are going to be able to take advantage of 5G to go on this transformation. So why is that? What's the characteristics of 5G that allows this transformation to happen so that it no longer is a limit, or no longer is a focus for a consumer network, but also to the industry? And maybe, Michael, let me turn to you because I think we both are from the infrastructure vendors and, from the technical definition of 5G. What do you see? What is 5G and how is it different from the previous generations?
Yeah, and so there's really two different versions of 5G these days. There's what's called centimeter wave and millimeter wave, and that's really just a difference in frequencies. So the centimeter wave is kind of operates more in your traditional cellular frequencies like that 4G, LTE, where, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, that's where they're all running, their networks today. Then there's the millimeter wave aspect, which opens up the higher frequencies and you get massive amounts of spectrum. You start talking about, instead of 20 megahertz, a spectrum for a channel, you talk 100 megahertz base spectrum. And then you could catenate 800 megahertz worth of spectrum today. So, number one, you're seeing a lot more freedom in terms of frequencies that operators can operate in. And, I also, the other differentiator I see is a little bit of the latency aspects. It's a faster response time. So that also enables, different use cases such as, virtual reality, self-driving cars, because response time becomes a lot more, important in those sort of applications. So 5G, it builds on a lot of what 4G does for us today, but it operates, really in a lot bigger arena than what we're used to, and that's where you get those massive bandwidth gains.
Yeah, excellent. And thank you for bringing in the spectrum as a perspective, because back in the 4G days, we don't really need to care too much about spectrum. It's like sunlight. It's everywhere. It covers everywhere. But when we get to 5G, there is a selection of the spectrum in different bands, mid-band, high band, low band, each of them having different perspectives. So how do you design your network to take advantage of their characteristics to cater to what you need for your network? It's becoming very important. And if you use the spectrum correctly, you could really get the full benefit of 5G as a technology to bring in the high bandwidth, the low latency aspect of it. Anything else that maybe, Jason, would you like to add to that discussion?
Yeah, I think obviously spectrum is the oil that powers the network, right? I mean, that's the gas that gets us moving. As you mentioned, right, in the past, you didn't really think about it. It was just there, right? And plus, the operators owned it, and you didn't really get much. You just took it as it was, right? The user-defined nature of 5G allows more control, but it also creates, to me, this opportunity for convergence, right? Not only at the very granular level, because if you look at traditional software developers, they kind of sat in one room, the network person sat in the other room, software developer finished, said, hey, I need a network, and they put it together, right? Now when you get applications, Michael mentioned augmented reality, virtual XR space, right? Latency is important, else you get car sick. But it's not just the cellular latency that's important. You got to think from the cellular endpoint to the cloud and back, and that's where you start getting this convergence take shape. So at a very micro level, network person, software person, they're getting closer together. So they understand in context. If I got high band spectrum, I can ship high content. If I got low band spectrum, I can ship different kinds of content, right? So it's imperative that those two start converging at a micro level. And then I'm going to hand this off nicely as we converge at a very big level to the cloud. And we start seeing integration with IBM and other places where now we're looking at not just the cellular network or the network, but the application and context of the network and vice versa. That's the opportunity that we need to really make happen at a very grand scale to hit the user types and use cases of tomorrow. And I think that's probably a good softball right to Valerie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads to what I believe Valerie and Steve are, knows very dear and near about at the edge of the network and IoT part of it. So would you like to chime in about that perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I will. Thank you for that tee up, Jason. You're absolutely right. It's about designing from end to end how to distribute compute resources and workloads so that we can achieve the use cases of business value, right? And that collaboration with our telco providers to design that for enterprises is really essential to our success here. So I mentioned when I kicked off that I work on offerings in this space, right? So where are the early adopters of edge computing? Therefore, and I want to share this. A couple of weeks ago, I did a webinar with our CTO of our telecommunications industry at IBM, and I focus very much on edge computing and on business value, right? So I asked him honestly. I'm like, hey, Craig, what people ask me all the time? Well, what's the role of 5G? And I'm not quite sure how to answer. I know we need it, but why? And he goes, well, listen, Val, at some point when you instrument, say, a factory, right, and you get what you want to do, bring that AI to the edge and instrument it, at some point you have so many of these machines talking to each other that the 4G network's going to max out. You need 5G. It just becomes, it's not a will it come, or when, it's like when are we going to have that transformation come? So it's a really exciting time for me. Like I said, I think it's the convergence of multiple exponential technologies that are going to allow us to harness the value of 5G. And Steve, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as a creator of software for this.
Yeah, no, it's the one thing I would add is that it's the moment that we're going through literally right now, even having this remote webinar and all working remotely and all relying on technology to allow us to communicate, to keep an eye on technology that we're responsible for maintaining and making sure that it's available to support enterprise experiences, consumer experiences. It's all just reinforcing that reliable connectivity at scale it's not only the future, it's a dependency that we have right now. And it's interesting just listening to it gets me so excited to think about the potential doors that this is going to open for the use cases that we're supporting. But also the other thing I would add is that I think that this is an opportunity to make reliable connectivity more accessible. I think it was Jason talking about, we think of this as almost the air. It's here, we breathe it, and we rely on it to support day-to-day operations. But there is still a very large population of devices that are out in the wild that don't have connectivity yet. They are waiting for it to become more accessible. I was just talking with a very large partner earlier this week, and they have under connected devices, they would classify a device that is connecting to the internet, scale of a couple 100,000 devices. But then they said just double that for the devices, another couple 100,000 devices that we would like to connect to, but we're constrained in our ability to do so based on where those devices are deployed in certain retailer environments. So making connectivity more accessible for these type of operators it's going to be transformative. I mean, that all of a sudden we can take the value proposition that we're spinning out today for reliable availability, monitoring, analytics, automation, and extend that to the device networks that today they can't connect. I think it's going to be pretty huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we touched on various characteristics about 5G. So let me try to summarize what we just talked about. Obviously, number one is the extreme broadband, high bandwidth, high capacity that we're going to see in 5G. And people might ask, so really, how fast do we expect to see? And let me just throw in a 3GPP definition. It's somewhere in the gigabits per second range for the peak throughput. And compared to today's LTE, we're talking about tens or at most hundreds of megabits per second. So that's the first aspect, 10 to 100 times more bandwidth and capacity. Number two is reliability. We talked a little bit about, we need the network to be reliable. And in the future definition of 3GPP, we're going to have this URLLC, ultra low latency, high reliability network. And it is that 5 nines of reliability that enables certain applications that just cannot suffer from any kind of delay or glitches, such as the robotic operation, for example. So that reliability is super important. It's also important in the critical first response network, for example. And so the number three aspect of it, which we also touched on, is latency. And that's also part of this URLLC, where we strive for very low latency. And that is also a key aspect that sets 5G different from the previous generation. And so how low is the latency that we could get to 5G? From the technical definition and all kinds of technical papers and demonstrations, we're striving for between 1 to 10 millisecond response time on the air interface. So that is what enables the industrial application that would otherwise have been impossible with the previous generations or Wi-Fi technology. So that, in my view, is what sets 5G apart and opens up this whole new world that we could apply 5G to all different kinds of verticals, industries, or enterprise business. Okay, so with that, let's then dive into, well, there's so much benefits about 5G and very interesting, and we are all very excited about making it happen, right? But then what would be the challenge that we might face by trying to implement all these great benefits that we just talked about that 5G can offer? So what are the challenges from the deployment perspective, from the business perspective? For one, I will start with the challenge on the deployment side would be getting the spectrum, obviously. So spectrum is important. So getting the right spectrum to design the right network for the business case or the use case that you're going to implement for your business or your industry. And so number two, very important, is what kind of use case that can leverage, can take advantage of 5G's characteristics and bring in business value. And I think it's very important that technology advancement is very fascinating. I'm personally very excited about all these advancements, but it has to bring in business value. So how do we connect the two? What would be the business cases that will really take advantage of what 5G can bring? So I think that would be something that that I would be really interested to hear our panelists' opinions. So how about let's start again. Let's start with Michael. What's your view about the challenges for implementing 5G, getting the full benefits of 5G, and what kind of business case or verticals do you look as the most promising verticals to get the full benefits?
Okay, so do I have like 8 hours to answer this question? So, I mean, seriously, in terms of, the challenges, right? Operators and private enterprise, there's going to be a cost to installing this equipment. You're going to look a lot of densification of cell sites. You're going to have smaller cells. So you have challenges, from the total cost of ownership. How do you get these things out there with, minimal backhaul? And there's some pretty kind of innovative, stories around backhaul as well, where you can use basically the same spectrum that you're using to provide service to your consumers. You can use that to backhaul your signal as well back to your basically the cloud. The other thing here is that, and this is a little bit in the lines of, I think people touched on about the innovations of 5G or what's different about 5G. 5G is moving a lot more to kind of a cloud-based compute platform. You have a lot of the network functions up in the cloud. That's going to present some integration challenges. You're going to see some integrators, become a lot more prominent in the 5G rollout, in my opinion. But we'll definitely see applications built in that same cloud. So when you're trying to get all this running smoothly, and you don't know where you're falling down in this cloud, some of those challenges will be fun to work through. And again, we've been working through them like the past year and a half for sure. Like longer, but in terms of commercial deployment, about the past year and a half. The benefits, I mean, right now the benefits are, I can't even. This is one that excites the heck out of me. Typically, as a guy who works for Nokia, we're always focused on the pipe, right? Well, the pipe gets you data fast. And there's a lot more than just like how fast can I download a video, right? It's when you start talking about, hey, there's an ambulance on the way to the hospital with, somebody in critical care, and now you have the ability for the doctor to remotely, diagnose and, direct or even remotely, consult. So you see like, those sort of, stories, out there. Are they fully there yet today? No. But what 5G is really enabling is, use cases like that, but as well as, thousands of other use cases that are just going to transform the way we can do things. In terms of like, disaster recovery, there's a ton of things that, can be done with 5G that, 4G is limited by. The massive bandwidth in times of disaster, if the hurricane hits, guess what? 5G systems will be able to, carry all of that data. There won't be, the user busy. Now, we have to be creative in terms of how we deploy the 5G. Like, Loon has kind of a cool thing with Google where they can float the base stations above, various, geographical areas and provide service. But, it's just, right now, 5G is at its infancy, and the application that can be built on it is what, is, I think, the biggest opportunity. I'll hand over to whoever wants to jump in. But
I'd love to jump in. I love the discussion we're having, first of all. And I absolutely agree with the concept that some of the challenges are, designing the right spectrum for that business case and, ensuring that you optimize, right, for the cost to install with the value you're going to receive. As I shared when I opened up, I focus on edge computing for industry transformation, right? 5G is an imperative to that. It's one of the exponential technologies, but I come at the problem a little differently, right? I think about it like how to deliver for industry. We see huge opportunity in manufacturing and industrial markets early on, of course, largely because of they've strategically been focused on the progression to Industry 4.0, and a lot of what edge computing is getting those real-time insights so that we can have ever-increasing levels of automation in designing intelligent workflows, right? So, and that creates more resiliency in the manufacturing spaces. But also, I think a lot about where we're at now, right, in our world. Everybody's working remote, right? So as a services provider, I have to think about, okay, so if we instrument and we bring this value to a client, how are we going to service it, right? So the latency benefits and the huge, bandwidth of 5G helps us a lot with virtual reality, right? So we can work with localized teams because they don't want to bring people on site, right, to provide them the instruction to do repairs or fixes because, it brings that expertise right into the localized environment. But, transferring that data, right, it's large, right? So we need those big pipes so that we can be in real time, people working even across the globe with virtual reality to do servicing. But one of the things I've long said is that I honestly believe that the benefits of 5G and Edge will be a services-led journey. The reason I believe that is because we do have to design the entire stack through for the business value and use case. And so what I'm really seeing is the only way to be successful in this market and to bring value is to collaborate in ways that we haven't done before, right? So a lot of work with the telcos, they come to us and ask, from an industry point of view, where's the value and transformation and competitive advantage? And, working together to create offerings that we go to market with together. I love this, co-created industry solutions, and it aligns so well with our advances in other exponential technologies like blockchain. If we get enough people adopting some of these, offerings or applications, then they can start to communicate together on a blockchain, right, and monetize that. So I know that's a lot to take in, but again, I come at it from a little different angle, right? How do I transform industry? Because that's what I'm passionate about. And I know that if we do this well, it's not going to be, a one small deployment. It's going to be huge over an enterprise. And so we're going to require that 5G and that expertise to design it on the continuum as that value is provided. So what do you think, Steve?
There's so much that was said between you and, yeah. Well, there's so much good that was said between both you and Michael. I may just pile on a little bit. I think very similar, I think that, we live in a world that's made up of a complex web of device and software systems. And those systems in isolation are really, really powerful, whether they're healthcare systems or manufacturing systems. They serve their purpose in that isolated environment. But once they become connected, so you're looking at networks of these systems, you have central visibility into them, and you can look at, what's out there? What is the inventory of systems that are out there? And then you're seeing data come in. You're able to draw off of a whole nother level of analytics to provide you insights that will further influence the future. And I think that those systems being connected, I love what you just said about a services-led transformation or a services-led journey. I think that that's right. All of these environments require a tremendous amount of energy in the form of service and uptake to keep everything running. The idea that we can be connected to these environments and that we can, from our couch, see what's going on, but also remotely recover systems that are having issues. Or even more powerful than that is, especially with the 5G latency gains that we get, there's an issue. the platforms that we have that sit over the top of these can automatically recognize and recover without human intervention, that's when we get into some really important transformation, I think. And then all of this, in my opinion, is leading to more connected environments where we can soak in more and more data over longer periods of time, lead us to a path where naturally, when we start to think about machine learning and artificial intelligence and the ability to identify patterns of behavior that just could work out future problems, the vision around artificial intelligence and machine learning will only be possible if we connect these systems and we start to pull in that data so that we have enough of it to draw the right conclusions. Yeah, so in my opinion, 5G is just another step, the fifth generation, if you will, of building that infrastructure that the future is going to rely on. So again, just reinforcing, I think, points that both Michael and Valerie have already made, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, Steve, I just want to add to that what you just described at the end is what I always say, that the benefit is that we can bring AI right to the edge where data is created, right? And it's the ability to get those insights and also to move, across an environment that allow us to then make decisions on those insights and automation. So we get self-healing processes, as you said. You're absolutely right. That's the convergence of multiple exponential technologies. It's so exciting.
Right, and to enable all this.
Yeah, I'd just add too, right, when we looked at the space coming in, all the challenges are relevant that were mentioned here, but the biggest challenge that we find is actually part of the goodness of 5G, right? 5G, cloud network's been software for a while. The good news of software and cloud is you can do whatever you want. The bad news of software and cloud is you can do whatever you want, right? And now the cellular network is built as such. Right, so we have that ability. So what we started then to pare down, and some of these things that we hinted at a little is, okay, now I've got user types, I got site types, I can push the network as far as I need to push it, the network's user defined. Then you get into kind of this Goldilocks paradox, which is what's just right? How do I find that just right fit? And it started to get into data, right? So what is the data ownership model of a certain site type and user type? Obviously, height, cycle conversations would be AR at a stadium, better fan experience, walking through the stadium. Problem is not everybody has the same carrier device, so how do you make that work for everyone, right? It's a challenge in data. Conversely, you take an industrial site, you take a refinery, you take a manufacturing site, you take even a hospital to a lesser degree. They control, they own the data, they own you in a lot of cases when you walk in. So their Goldilocks paradox is easier to come by because they don't have to think about the consumer, who's not everybody, right? They don't control that device and that user point. So then we started to back into that saying, well, my construct is flat, meaning what I provide is flat, the infrastructure, the enablement layer. So now my customers are starting to ideate based on a flat construct that can be 10,000 square feet or 10 square miles, 20 square miles, the entire west side of Texas, because I'm in Texas, right? So that's the same construct at different areas of bubble. And then you take into a construct of the ecosystem. So from an AT&T lens, we take care of this model of, I'll take care of layers 1 to 3.5. Working with someone like an IBM, they take care of layers 3.5 to 7, and we got to share this. We got a shared responsibility of privacy and security at the convergent point. That's the types of things that start happening with customers because now they see this flat enablement layer. And some of the use cases aren't VR. Some of the use cases are as simple as I need to walk from A to B inside of my plant and not drop my connectivity because it's a safety hazard. It's a risk. Or it's I don't have sensors in locations that it was just too cost prohibitive for the hypotheses return on investment. So now you take and factor in a low power wide area. It's not a linear conversation anymore, but the more we tried to get a flat topology, the easier our customers could ideate around near, mid, and long-term constructs, which is now feeding not only the more consumer-driven applications and platform, but also the larger hierarchy as we look at the macro network, smart city, smart state, smart, et cetera, smart insert something. Platform stays the same. Use case technology shifts based on user type, site type, and data type. That's how we try to think about it, to get through the challenge of what is it and how do I use it. That way it's in the context of the customer. I'll turn it back to you, Aaron. I don't know if there was another question coming behind that or not.
Well, actually, that was a very good point and a good transition into what's the, because Jason, I'm looking at you from operator as being in the critical juncture. You're basically taking the technology, whatever is available, connecting it to the business application and deliver the business value. So from the operator's perspective, is that what our operators are seeing themselves in the future as the focal point of providing the technology value to business? And if so, what are the verticals that you think would be the prime examples of taking big getting big business value out from 5G?
Well, the first thing is, we talked about it already. We're at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're the air, we're the water, right? You don't have connectivity, you can't breathe, you can't survive. So we're going to be in every industry. Fact, right? It doesn't matter. You need connectivity of some sort. But when you think about, how the industries have mapped out, how we've mapped toward the industries, it's back to the data construct. Not that we can't and haven't worked across the industries, it's just that we've targeted that way. Good news of 5G from an operator perspective, and I think you can see this as you look at the different commercials, is 5G is not the same. It's not like LTE, where it's all you talked about was who was the fastest, what your map looked like. And there is a component of that in 5G. Oftentimes in my conversations, if I say the word speed once, I've said it too many times, because speed just happens natively. It's been, 20 to 40% spectral increase, aka faster speeds over other generations. That'll continue to take shape similar here. But latency and convergence and network, meshing with the cloud and those kind of things, that's a new space, right? Education, getting that education. So as an operator, I can take the lens of traditional. I can take the lens of the perspective of central office conversion edge. I can take the premise private networking kind of approach. I can do a multitude of different things, none of which are wrong. They just take a different approach and a different user type on the other end. We see great advantage early on in the industrial spaces, in particular because they own the data. Right? I don't have to think about consumer opt-in. I don't have to worry about satisfying every person out there. I have to worry about satisfying that business use case. Then you start seeing, if you went left to right on that ownership model of data, you see more and more of that ease to implementation happen on the left-hand or user-owned. So that's why I say early on, industrial, manufacturing, et cetera. As time progresses, as scale happens, as edge continues to evolve, deployments continue to evolve, the handoffs, the integrations, then you'll see more on the consumer side, I think, right? Not that the network won't be there, but the next-gen use cases will take a little bit longer to develop on top of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we also earlier talked about 5G being a journey. So a journey takes time, which means that it takes time to design your infrastructure, design your use case, to implement it, and then get the business benefit out from it. So let me throw in some numbers that I saw from an analyst from KPMG that estimated the value to be unlocked by 5G use cases to be 4.3 trillion. And if you look at all different verticals, I'm seeing manufacturing is about to get the benefit of 600 billion in 1 year time frame. Retail, 850 billion in 6-year time frame. Healthcare, 400 billion in 3 years. So that tells us there is a different scale in terms of the business benefit that we could get. For different verticals, there is also a difference on the time frame about how soon that you could get the business benefits. So what do you all think about this perspective?
I think that aligns with some market insights that we've been working with as well, especially around manufacturing being the early adoption, right? For the reasons I stated before around aligning with the Industry 4.0 imperative. and retail, although I do wonder how our current world status is going to affect retail. So I don't have an answer on it, but we're watching closely, right?
I think it changes. I think it changes a little bit, but it's still there. It shifts from what we would normally think to something different. It's kind of what the trend seems.
A lot more sweatpants are sold these days.
And I would say also that I think around distribution. I think that's we have supply chain challenges currently, right? So where a market that was pretty stable before, suddenly there's some real challenges there. So the ability to have sensors that can connect anytime, anywhere, mobily to monitor sensitive goods, food, medical supplies, things like that. That's important right now. When we were doing these analyses, a year, 2 years ago, that wasn't the name of the game. But in the last 6 months, our world has changed. So I'm actually looking closely there, and hoping for a lot of reasons, mostly to be part of the recovery of our world, to focus in some of those areas.
Yeah, the one thing that. Sorry,
I'll jump in real quick. So this disruption aspect, I think that's really what 5G is enabling. You now have the ability to bring a lot of your processing power back up into the cloud because you have this, big, data pipe that you could, pipe things up. So you have an opportunity for lower cost, sensors on the endpoint or lower cost user devices. And so, a lot of this, a lot of the traditional, solutions have expensive endpoints, right? Now you have a ability to have super cheap endpoints, and with that super cheap endpoint, it allows massive deployments of them. And then that kind of translates into this healthcare space, for example. You can have sensors, that kind of just, beam data up, consistently or at periodic times. But it's the way we do things today because we're limited in terms of, response time or limited in terms of amount of bandwidth we can transmit. That opens up the solution set, in all these different areas, that Aaron was talking about, whether it's manufacturing, healthcare, whatever. So that's what I'm really kind of, interested to see how a lot of these solutions come out now.
Yeah, I was just going to add that maybe it's a risk, but when we think about projections and we think about the pace of adoption, so much of that is educational based. You've got industries that have been operating under decades and sometimes centuries of existing process, manual process that we are naturally people like us, we get excited when we think about, well, a connected environment and the data and the analytics and the automation that's going to change, it's going to change an entire industry overnight. And I think it takes a lot of education and a lot of time to recalibrate a market segment on how to leverage this technology to get real business value out of it. We find that a lot of it, our sales cycles when it comes to big industry is they take a longer time because we're spending so much time educating the customer or the prospect on what this means and what it looks like and what the value will be and proving that it will be there before they actually implement it. And so I think when we talk about laying down this sort of infrastructure, we have to have a reasonable set of expectations around education, making sure that the value, the business value is well understood. And I think Jason mentioned something that I totally agree with. It's not just the macro solution, this big complex solution that everyone's going to buy. Sometimes it's the really small obvious stuff like tell me where I am in the facility. To us that seems like that's not that difficult to do. To a particular market segment, that might be the thing that means 100% growth the next year. So keeping it simple, I think, is a when we talk about leveraging this technology, keeping it simple, and also educating and making sure that these markets understand the value of the technology and the true business value. That's got to be a big part of our focus. And I can see, even though I can't see you, Valerie, I know that you're nodding your head yes and you agree, because that's totally what I'm sure you spend all your time doing.
Totally, I am. And in fact, I don't want to overdo my time, but as we're talking, I really believe we need to rethink just because of so many changes in our world. Out of our Singapore, lab, we detected that there are 5 use case families that emerge with some dominant impacts. And just real briefly, I'll say time-critical process optimization, right? So anytime you need a real-time closed-loop communication between machines, that will increase, efficiency and flexibility. The 3D augmented reality, the 3D video-driven use cases, right? There's non-time-critical intercommunication. So that's like tracing objects, sensor data capturing, right? Data capture for design simulation purposes, remote control, that's a big one. So in mining industry, right? Any areas where it's unsafe to go on site, which is why I was bringing up, our current state in COVID, and we don't want people on site, right? So remote quality inspection and diagnostics, intra-enterprise communication. So that, as you were saying, the reliable and secure interconnection of premises or tracking goods and services throughout the value chain. And then the last one is, of course, connected goods. That one is more consumer focused. All the other are very much enterprise focused. And so that's, it aligns to some of the demands that we're seeing in the supply chain area about connecting goods during the product life cycle so you can monitor it and then optimize your products for the industry. So I wanted to share that because to me, we have to be careful not to be the proverbial hammer looking for a nail. We have to. So anytime I look at a business situation, I always say, does it fit into one of these use case families? If it doesn't, maybe it's not edge computing. Maybe it definitely is on the cloud. So, to Michael's point of determining when to use that network cloud versus, I need to drive this to the edge. Right? So, hope that's helpful.
That's great. And I think we did touch on the various industry sectors, how they could benefit from 5G. I also like the conversation between Steve and Valerie about the education of the business, about how to take advantage of, of 5G. And I think that's a good segue to get into our next section and the last, topic, headline, which is, given all our audience on the bridge today, what would be our recommendation? What can business and technologists do to prepare? Because from our conversation so far, it sounds like 5G has limitless potential. But what should we, as technologists or business, prepare for it? And taking from the first step and on to really get that big benefit of 5G. So, who wants to jump in about what's our advice for business, enterprise, technologists to prepare for 5G era?
So I'll start. I think the first bullet, and kind of pick it up on the last one, is get educated. Right? This isn't operator driven. You can't do anything with the network anymore. As an enterprise, right? You can do things with it that if it's not here today, the operators will allow you to do it, or you can do it on your own, right? So get educated on what it is. Again, say that 3 or 4 times. Kind of in line with that, you have the question is, what can businesses and technologists do? They can become the same person, right? You need those unicorns that can speak geek and can speak capitalist, right? Because if I go build something in a vacuum, I'm not going to get what I need on the other side. So we're seeing a lot of, again, just like we do with software and user-defined, it's similar here. Understanding context, what you're trying to do, and that gets to the last point, is take a current state inventory. Right? We always want to focus on these high-end super use cases, but like I mentioned before, location could be the silver bullet, or one of my customers in particular, they just couldn't afford alternatives for sensors today. But now looking at just a slight change in how the network's built changes everything. So it's doing that inventory of what you're doing today, which will lead to how changes can happen tomorrow. And that's everything from your robots to just handhelds to sensors, where there are some and are none. And again, it all really ties back to education. Become both geek and capitalist at the same time. And the use cases come as you understand the network. So.
Great, thank you.
I love the geek and capitalist. I love it. I actually agree. What I was going to say is that I think we all just have to believe, right, that it's not just 5G. It's the emergence of multiple exponential technologies that put us at an inflection point, right? We are literally moving into, beyond the digital age and into what I call the cognitive age, right? With those self-healing processes and whatnot. And do we have it all worked out? No. We know the low-hanging fruit, as we talked about before, manufacturing, retail. But there is so much opportunity here. So I think it's very, very important for enterprises to, understand your business KPIs, right, against industry benchmarks, and then think about, if I could fix this a little bit, if I could reduce the cost of maintaining my assets, how would that help me, conserve capital, right? And then, put some budget aside for innovation with firms that are working in this area. Because again, we don't have it all worked out. We need to work together, right? And it's going to be a very exciting time, and we'll see where the repeatable values are.
Yeah, I was going to be, yep, I can go next and then throw it over to you, Michael. I think a couple of these things have been said, but I do think that it's a good idea to start planning for some spend in this area. So budget cycles and starting to think about budgeting for an investment in, even initially, the education point that's been made several times. I think partnerships are probably a really strong idea here as well. There's making sure that you have the right partner network to make sense of some of this stuff, whether it's the core infrastructure or the business applications that on the other end of the spectrum. I think that this isn't something that always has to be built yourself. There are lots of folks that are out here playing in this space to make it easier and more accessible. So I think relying on those partnerships, both from an education standpoint, but to help build a vision around the solutions and what the digital transformation can do for your business or your industry would be a wise idea.
Yeah, so I guess I'll jump in. I think you guys addressed the business aspect of the question pretty well in terms of the innovation budget and thinking maybe a little bit farther down in terms of partnering. So totally in agreement on that space. I guess relative to the technologists, I think one of the best things that the technologists can do is really, understand, I would say the overall architecture that's in play here. And the good thing is the architecture leverages a lot of, industry standards, network slicing, virtual functions. These things are all things that there's so many industries pursuing these, but now you can start putting this inside, effectively a cellular infrastructure that used to be very proprietary. You couldn't get out to the edge. It's now open, and so there's going to allow them to loosen some of the shackles that they used to have to live with, which was some of these long latencies. So understanding what 5G opens up for you, as well as some of the limitations involved as well, are going to allow you to find those sweet spots to go, okay, hey, yeah, here's something that I can disrupt. And that disruption, again, is where, and I love the other side, but that disruption is where the 5G use cases are really going to shine. But for the technologists, it's really understanding, what the network opens up for you now.
Great points from all the panelists. And let me just throw in one more thing, which is I believe we all need to have a very open mind about the new business model. Given how disruptive 5G may be, this business model that works today may not work for tomorrow. So, having a very open mind about the new business model is also important to prepare to what 5G is yet to bring to all of us. Okay, so I'm looking at our Q&A window, and we do have a very interesting question on the Q&A box. But let me just also invite all our audience to submit your questions if you like to share with us. And let me just read our questions that we have in the box here, which I'm sure a lot of people are very interested to know. What about the perceived and real health danger of 5G? And let me add some context to it. I think a few months ago, there were some protests in different parts of the world about the potential impact to human health of 5G technology. And obviously, from my perspective, because I'm a technologist, I know what is or is not misinformation, but there was this phenomenon. So let's see let's hear from our experts here. So what is the perceived or is there a real health danger of 5G? And maybe Michael, would you like to say a few words about help us with this question?
Yeah, so first off, I am not a medical doctor, so don't take my words as gospel here. But, I look at, this as new technologies. There's a lot of people that, go, okay, hey, we don't know the effects of exposing the human body to, all this spectrum and energy for, 20 years worth of time, right? But I kind of, rely on the medical folks that, our industries, that Nokia relies on, that Ericsson relies on. They look at the papers, they look at the medical data, they understand the exposure, and currently, from everything that I've researched is that there's nothing out there that backs up, some of these fears. Now, there are some legit things, like if you shine a millimeter wave, in your eyes at close distance for a long period of time, yeah, there's going to be issues there, right? But relative to the 5G rollout, I'm relying on the experts in this space in terms of following that. Hey, this should be okay, and it reminds me very much of the old days when 2G and 3G were being rolled out, and everybody was saying that the cell phones were causing brain tumors at a high rate. Again, we went to data, and based off of data, there wasn't really a whole lot behind that, at least from all the history I'm aware of. But yeah, right now I understand it's new. It's something that people are always going to go, well, we don't know, right? But also there are a number of studies out there that indicate that things are safe.
Yeah, and I'd just say, I started thinking of the show Downton Abbey, right? Change is scary, right? People were afraid of electricity. People were afraid of the telephone. And it's always good to investigate, right? We need to assuage those fears or confirm them, right? But I don't think, I think we should know that all progress is resulted in some fear of change. That's how I look at it.
That's great. And let me just also add, 5G is new, but we earlier talked about the different spectrums that 5G is using. Really, out of all the spectrums that 5G is using, only the millimeter wave is new. Mid-band, we have been using it every day. As a matter of fact, Wi-Fi is directly at the mid-band, 2.5 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So, and then low band, we have it like sunlight, for 4G coverage. So really, what's new is millimeter wave. But as Michael mentioned, there is all kinds of studies and regulation as well in terms of the power output of the infrastructure, etc., to ensure the health concern. So I do believe that our health experts and the regulators are definitely making sure that 5G as a technology, bringing all the technological benefits, are not going to compromise on the human health concerns. Okay. All right. I think we are a little bit over time. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I think this is a great conversation, and I want to thank all my panelists for contributing to such a great discussion. I wish we have more time that we could continue on this discussion, but I hope this also brings some insights into our audience. And 5G, I'm sure all my panelists would agree with me, is a topic that we're all very passionate about, and we all see great potential. And so I hope that we all work together as an ecosystem to bring 5G to life. All right, so with that, I'd like to end today's webinar, and I'd like to thank all our audience for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, and stay safe.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.